While Ashley is pulling up our slides, I want to introduce myself. My name is Laura Collins. I am a program manager at the New England Environmental Finance Center, and I'm joined by my colleague Ashley at Quantified Ventures. She will introduce herself just a little bit later. And we are here to talk about getting your system prepared for the SRF application process. So thank you all for joining us on this Friday. Next slide, Ashley, please.
Getting there.
So
there we go.
Oh, thanks, Ashley. So I'm a part of the New England Environmental Finance Center, or NEFC, as we're often known. We are one of many regional EFCs around the country that are supported by EPA, and we work specifically in Region 1, so that's in all 6 New England states. And we've been around for over 22 years and have an extensive network, throughout New England. We are based in Portland, Maine at the University of Southern Maine. Our priorities for our organization are broadly focused on sort of climate adaptation, stormwater, water infrastructure management, nature-based solutions, and sort of sustainable operating practices. And throughout all of our work, we prioritize working with disadvantaged communities, sort of small, rural, remote, and those communities that face the greatest environmental burdens, but lack the capacity to kind of deal with those challenges. And when I say community, I mean states, tribes, local governments, nonprofits, community-based organizations, and small businesses. Next slide, please. Today we are here to talk about mention a specific program, which is one of our newest programs. It's the New England Water Infrastructure Network. We just finished our first year, and the overarching goal of this program is to help communities access bipartisan infrastructure law funding for drinking water, wastewater, stormwater, and non-point source pollution needs. We primarily do this, help communities access clean water and drinking water state revolving fund money, but we can also work with communities on sort of identifying other funding sources. We work with any SRF eligible entity, so that varies by state. And as I mentioned earlier, we really prioritize working with disadvantaged communities or those facing significant water quality challenges. And our assistance is free, and we work with a network of experienced partners across New England, and we provide technical, financial, and managerial assistance to help meet a range of water challenges. Next slide, please. So this is sort of a broad overview of the services that we provide. Basically, we aim to meet communities where they're at and move them closer to securing funding for project implementation. So we offer assistance at every step of the project process, from, community outreach and engagement, to planning and sort of pre-application work, to identifying pre-development funds, conducting comprehensive financial assessments, all the way through to project construction and inspection. And with that, I will pass it back to Ashley to introduce herself and kind of set us up for the rest of our discussion.
Yeah, thank you, Laura. Next slide. So I am with an organization called Quantified Ventures. Prior to working with Quantified Ventures, I was actually the Drinking Water State Revolving Loan Fund lead in Vermont for 15 plus years. So I speak SRF fluently. I live it, breathe it, and this is what I love talking about. So favorite thing. But the organization that I work for, Quantified Ventures, is a consulting company, and we have essentially 2 arms of our organization, one that focuses on climate finance and the other that works on health and human services. And essentially, we like to call ourselves the disruptor in many areas of community finance. So on the climate finance side specifically, we're in community finance, which is where this SRF technical assistance lives. We're also sort of dipping our toes into green banks. We have proven ourselves in natural climate solutions, especially in your neighbor Maine. We have some depth there with conserving significant tracts of land there. And we also work closely with organizations that are trying to expand outdoor recreation at the same time, sort of conserving those similar tracts of land. So I'm going to turn my webcam off as we delve into the presentation, just so I don't distract myself when I look. It's like my camera's like backwards. Anyway, so on to the why you're all here. So state revolving loan funds, like I said, my favorite topic, and I believe that SRFs really are just one of the best sources of funding that exists for water, wastewater, stormwater, natural infrastructure projects. So you're probably like, okay, well, what are the state revolving loan funds? And I love this slide because it really shows kind of how the money comes in and how the money goes out. So every year, the Environmental Protection Agency, by way of the federal government, grants money to state SRF programs. The state governments then match that money and put it into what we call the kitty. State programs then lend money out to borrowers for eligible projects, and then in turn those borrowers will repay those loans, and those repayment dollars go back into the kitty. The Clean Water State Revolving Loan Fund, which does stormwater and wastewater projects, has been around for almost 40 years. I feel like I'm probably off a decade, 30 years, and the 1996, that was like 20 years. Okay, so the CWSRF has been a little more than 30 years, and the drinking water SRF has been around for a little over 20 years. So you can imagine that the amount of revolved money coming back into the kitty is significant. And aside from the recent infusion of bipartisan infrastructure law money, the amount of money being revolved into the program is often like 2, 3, 4 times as much as is coming in from EPA and state governments. So on the drinking water side, in terms of federal eligibilities, essentially any project that maintains compliance or achieves compliance with the Safe Drinking Water Act is loan eligible. And this can run the gamut of security to treatment plants to lead service line replacements to just like basic, just keeping up with aged infrastructure. It can also help communities find additional sources of water, and it can also pay for conservation and or water efficiency projects like leak detection or replacement of even fixtures in people's homes that are wasting a lot of water. I know it seems weird to take a loan out to replace people's toilets, but if it's going to save the water system money and avoid having to find additional sources, then that certainly is a use for SRF funds. I did want to take a moment to note, especially on the lead service line portion of eligibility, and this is specifically related to the bipartisan infrastructure law or bill lead service line pot of money, is that essentially the biggest goal or the only goal of this money is to get the lead out. And so if a community is planning to replace a water main and they come across any lead, they must replace the lead. Now, I know you're thinking, we don't do any work on private property. And while I understand that sentiment, the reality is that you must replace that lead service line if you come across it. Again, you're probably like, well, how is the homeowner's got to pay for that, or I don't do any work on private property. So if that's the case, then you should not be replacing the water main. So you're like, how do I get both done, right? How do I replace my water main, and how do I make sure that the lead service line is also being replaced? And this is why these inventories are very important to complete prior to do any water main replacement work, so that you can work with homeowners who have lead service lines to identify them and to make sure that you are properly planning for both sort of the construction side of things and also the financing side of replacing those lead service lines. And again, the lead service line is not just sort of that gooseneck off of the water main to the curb stop. It is the entire service line from the water main into the what's considered premise plumbing. So up to and including the water meter. And of course, us living in northern climates, in almost every case, the meter is going to be in a basement. It could be in a meter pit, but remember that if there is lead post meter pit, that lead still needs to be replaced. There, of course, are ineligibilities on the DWSRF side. Any kind of routine operation and maintenance is not eligible. Routine water testing, so basically like, if you have to take your volatile organic compound samples every, I think it's 3 years or something like that, that is not SRF eligible. Any kind of project that expands a water system that is not specifically to consolidate or to address a public health issue is not allowed. Any kind of project that is strictly for fire protection is not allowed. Now, I often get the question of like, well, if I have a project planned and it's going to be making the storage tank bigger so that I can fight fire, or it's going to increase the size of the water mains so that I can fight fire, is that okay? And the answer to that is yes, as long as the lines have reached their expected useful life. So essentially, you're not like digging up pipes that you put in 10 years ago because now you want to provide fire protection. As long as the infrastructure that you're replacing is A, already reached its useful life, and B, the increase in the asset's capacity is in line with both fire protection and reasonable growth over the expected useful life of the asset. Those are the only times that you can essentially upsize for growth and or fire protection. And this seems kind of like obvious that the SRF wouldn't pay for deregulation of a public water system, but I have had that question before. I had a community come to us when they had to put in like treatment for uranium or something like that, and they were a really small homeowners association, and they were like, can we use the SRF to drill individual wells so that we're no longer a regulated public water system? And I was like, no, you cannot use the SRF to do that. You can use your own money to do it, but not public funds. And another thing that would seem counterintuitive to the drinking water SRF program is that SRF, sort of like generally speaking, SRF funds, drinking water funds, cannot be used to purchase land in a source protection area, to purchase conservation easements, things of that nature. Land associated with the siting of a storage tank or of a well or of a treatment plant are loan eligible, but not the purchase of land, unless there's a program that the state has set up specifically to purchase land, and that's it would be a completely separate program outside of what's called like the construction pot of money or the traditional funds. Are there any questions so far?
Nope, no questions at this point.
Great. So moving on. We like to look at project planning in, one might say, 4 steps, even though this first step is step 0. So step 0 would be sort of preparing for a project. It's all of the like behind the scenes work that is done before you actually like hire an engineer and say, we want to do this project. Step 1 would be what might be considered preliminary engineering or feasibility. Step 2 might be considered final design or applying for permits. And step 3 would be construction or project implementation. So I want to spend some time talking about step 0 because it's often like the unsung part of a project, because there's just so much sort of silent work that goes into prepping for a project. And there are some ways that, especially New Hampshire, has provided opportunities for financial assistance in getting those sort of step 0 activities underway. And I would say kudos to New Hampshire for doing this. There are a lot of states that sort of just leave communities to their own devices to kind of put the pieces together and figure out kind of where to start, hire the engineer, things like that. But New Hampshire's done a really good job of making use of some of those federal funds to create funding opportunities to kind of get that step 0 started or get that project planning started. And I know personally, I find that the availability of planning and design loans is really imperative, especially for those really small communities, because small communities do not have the the cash on hand necessarily to pay an engineer tens of thousands, sometimes even, depending on the size of the project, $100,000+ to kind of start the feasibility and design of a project. And so having the ability to take out planning and design loans where there essentially are no payments required until that project gets implemented is really kind of that lifeline that a lot of you small communities have. And I strongly encourage you to utilize that. And we'll get into that a little bit later in our slides, and how you can take advantage of New Hampshire's opportunity for planning and design loans. So just kind of reiterating those kind of step 1 and step 2 plans or activities. So feasibility and preliminary engineering, which is what we would consider step 1. It's kind of like, all right, let's just brainstorm here. Like, what do we got? What are the options for, placing the tank or siting the pump house, or rerouting the line? Do we, instead of having flushing hydrants at the end of the line, maybe we loop it? And what is that going to do to water quality and pressure and things of that nature? This is the time, this step 1 or preliminary is the time to like spitball, is to like, okay, like what are the possible ways that we can accomplish our goal of X, improving water quality, increasing system sustainability, making like fixing so that we're not in the middle of January digging down 6 feet of frost and 8 feet of snowpack to like fix our broken pipes for the 17th time. How do we best accomplish that? The preliminary engineering report will put some preliminary figures, dollar figures, to the cost of replacing the infrastructure. It will also take into consideration some of the environmental impacts or challenges that might come up when, depending on the type of project that's, or the path of project that's chosen. And then final design is that step 2 side of the planning process, where after the preliminary engineering report is completed, you, the community, the water system, along with your engineer, and often with state representatives, will choose the best option, both in terms of initial cost, but frankly, ongoing maintenance and an upkeep of the project and its impact on the users. And final design will be where your engineer will essentially put pen to paper and be like, okay, now we're like rubber meets the road here. This is the project. We're developing pricing sheets. We're digging deeper into the environmental factors, things of that nature. Another consideration that should occur during the sort of planning, that step 0 and even into step 1 process, is this concept of technical, managerial, and financial capacity. Now, this assessment is unique to the Drinking Water State Revolving Loan Fund, though I believe it has application on the Clean Water SRF, and some states do similar evaluations on wastewater borrowers, but this is really unique to the Drinking Water SRF program. And this is where state staff will either ask you, the borrower, to do a self-assessment of how you think you are technically, managerially, and financially, or they will sit down with you and go through a survey themselves to evaluate how you are technically, managerially, and financially. I used to do this with borrowers in Vermont. I would visit them and I would have, I say 20 questions, but it was probably more like 50 questions about how they operate their system. Do they have standard operating procedures? Does their board meet on a regular basis? Are the meetings open? Do they have reserves? When was the last time you raised your rates? What are you doing budget projections? This would be a time when I was meeting with the communities, when I would ask them, okay, do you have an idea of how much your project is going to cost? Have you started budgeting for it? Have you done your budget projections to see what your estimated debt payment is going to look like to your rates? No? Okay, let's do it. Let's do it now, so when it comes to that, like applying for the loan in a year or two, it's not like a surprise to your users that you're going to have to do this crazy rate increase or user rate increase in a really short amount of time. What it does is it gives you time to plan to implement that rate increase, or to make some budget adjustments, perhaps even to pay down existing debt and then essentially backfill that debt payment with new debt. This is the time to do that. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to pop over to, and you have this in your handout. You have the there's a rate template that the New Hampshire DES has created that you can use. It's pretty user friendly and it's pretty simple. Give me a second to switch my screen so that I can share the one Yep, here we go. So you should now be seeing the Excel spreadsheet, the user rate template that New Hampshire has created. I will say that this rate template is really useful only for communities that have a flat rate. Those communities that charge a base rate and a flow rate, essentially who use meters, this is not necessarily going to be that useful in terms of figuring out what your rate should be or could be. It is, however, useful in figuring out projections. So the way this is set up is on this first page, you are going to, and you can add lines, you can change these names. I threw some figures in here based on, you know, just an estimate of a community that has 350 services. It's Acme Water System. It was prepared by Bugs Bunny, which is myself. And so we have the cost for this year, and then you have next year's budget for what you think that these are going to cost. And you notice that I did some just projection increases just year over year to account for inflation, or perhaps it's a year that I have to take an expensive test, or I have to clean out my tank, my storage tank. This is where you can do your projections. And then on the next tab down here, under 5-year projection, this is where it will pull those figures that you put in for 2003. Wow, it has been a while since 2003. 2023, and it will apply an inflation factor. So we can go here and we can say, you know what, it's actually been a really big inflation year, so I'm going to change this to 4.5%. And the spreadsheet will automatically update the costs based on your 2013, and it's going to essentially add 4.5% each year going forward. Alternatively, if you're like, you know, we haven't really experienced that much inflation, we're gonna reduce it. Now this applies the inflation across the board as opposed to individual categories. So you may be seeing a faster increase in costs on electricity than you do on sampling or insurance, for example. You can essentially go in and override it. So if you know that your electricity is actually going to go up to $1,600, you can say, all right, I'm going to override that, and then it's gonna then fix it in the future. And then if you scroll down to the bottom of this table, you will see that it is giving you an estimated user rate per year based on your current budget, and then what is sort of projected based on inflationary figures going forward. So you can see what kind of increase year over year your users may need to experience. Again, this rate template is good really only for those that charge a flat rate, but it's something is better than nothing. I know that communities that I've worked with, very few of them would have any kind of projection outside of even, frankly, just the next year until it was like time for budget season, and it would frustrate me to no end. Before we switch back, do I have any questions about the rate template?
Still no questions at this point.
Okay. So if you'll allow me a moment to get up on my soapbox, I like to talk about ways, the different ways to pay for infrastructure, and essentially my philosophy on budgeting. So in the world of infrastructure financing, there are 4 generally accepted ways of kind of like, you know, paying for it. So there's this concept of pay-go or pay-as-you-go, where you account for in your annual budget the cost to replace your infrastructure. You will see this a lot in much larger communities, and I'm saying like big cities. Like I don't even know if Concord, New Hampshire would be big enough to have a robust pay-as-you-go program. They may have a line item in their budget for some capital improvement on an annual basis, but it's not going to be to the point where they can avoid debt. Like it would be tens of millions of dollars that they'd have to put in their annual budget, which of course would then be reflected in the annual user rate. Reserves are where you save in advance. That makes sense, right? It's a savings account. You're going to put some amount away every year to pay for future investment. Subsidies or grants or principal forgiveness is where, frankly, you're letting somebody else pay. So you're getting money from the state or the federal government or some other entity that you don't have to pay back. And that's letting someone else pay for your infrastructure. And then finally, we have loans. Loans or debt is where you make the investment now and you pay for it over time, or you pay for it later. These communities, again, the bigger they are, the more they will employ all of these opportunities. But I would say for the smaller communities, you're really looking at the reserves, subsidies, and loans. And in terms of budgeting, and not everybody agrees with me on this, especially those communities that are really debt averse, but I look at this in terms of asset life expectancy. So when you have assets that have a relatively short-lived useful life, those are what you should be budgeting for. We're talking chemicals, we're talking peristaltic pumps, we're talking maybe to some extent vehicles. The medium-lived assets, these would be more like meters, and it might be backup pumps for your wells. Those are what you should be saving for. So that's where your reserves comes in, because you frankly don't want to be taking out a loan for a pump that lasts 10 years, that needs to be replaced every 10 to 15 or 20 years, because the cost associated with financing can be steep. And then in terms of those long-lived assets, you want to finance those over the longest period of time possible to match with their expected useful life. And really what this boils down to is the concept of intergenerational equity. And to kind of give you a non-water system example of intergenerational equity that I think is easier to understand is I owned a condo, and I lived in that condo for 2.5 years. And every year that I lived there, I had a special assessment to replace the roof. So the roof, and they actually didn't even replace the roof while I lived there, because they needed to like have all the money in order to pay the contractor to replace the roof, and they were doing it one building at a time. And I lived in like the third building, and so they did the first one the first year. Anyway, you understand. So here I am living in the condo for 2.5 years. I have paid over and above my HOA dues, my special assessment, for a roof that is going to last 30 years. So then the person who purchased the condo after me does not have a special assessment for the roof, but they are enjoying the benefits of a brand new roof. It's a similar thing on a water system side. So if a water system tries to save or charge their current users the quote full cost of the infrastructure, they are burdening the existing users of the infrastructure the cost for replacing it in maybe 20 years. So a successive generation, in theory, is going to benefit from the excessive burden of the current generation or current users. Any questions before we?
Yes, we do have one question.
Yay.
As a small nonprofit, if you have never set rates before, do you have to get approved by the PUC to start implementing rates for the homes in your community?
I would boot that back to New Hampshire DES. I would say every state is different, but typically if you're a nonprofit, no, you don't have to. But I would defer to New Hampshire on that.
Okay. Do we have anyone on the call? Shelley, I'm not sure if you're able
Yes.
to address that question. Thank you.
Yes, can you hear me okay?
Yes, thank you.
Great. So even though technically small systems are covered by the PUC, they're generally not. It would have to be a pretty special situation for a small system to have to report to the PUC. And
Okay.
I've never seen one.
Great, thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah, that tracks. And essentially it's because a nonprofit, I'm presuming, I don't want to presume, but I'm assuming it's like a homeowners association. So everybody would have essentially equal voting rights on the budget and the people representing them. It's only in situations where the ratepayers essentially don't necessarily have a say in how things are implemented is when the public utility commissions get involved. At least that's my experience.
Great, and that's it for questions right now.
Great. Okay, on to the loan process. So I don't do this to scare you. I do this to manage your expectations. So the SRF loan process, and I say it's very high level, and you're probably like, whoa, those are a lot of steps, even though that's very high level. Again, I don't do this to scare you. I do this to manage expectations. So yes, the SRFs can be a complicated process. It is federal money. There are a lot of checks and balances along the way, but there are partners here to help you, including NEWIN, including myself, including New Hampshire DES. So I'll touch on some of the ones that I want to make sure that you're well aware of as we go through the next couple slides. So New Hampshire uses a preliminary application, which is the time period we're in right now. And I suspect that's why we are all here right now is so that you can learn about the preliminary application process. So essentially what this does is this provides an opportunity for a potential borrower to raise their hand and say, I have a project. I think it's this much money. I think it does these things. Put me on the list. And then the state or New Hampshire DES can then say, thank you very much. We're going to put you in line with everybody else, and we're going to see how much money we have available, what kind of additional subsidy you can receive. Additional subsidy is often called principal forgiveness. Some people like to call it free money. I don't believe there's any such thing as free money. But essentially it creates this priority ranking, a priority list of projects. Now, one thing actually two things. One is that completing the preliminary application is not applying for a loan. There is a second application that you will have to complete if you are at the point where you can apply for a loan to complete your project. Second, completing a preliminary application and being on the priority list does not compel you or require you to take a loan. It is merely raising your hand. However, aside from lead service line replacements, if you are not on the priority list, it is highly unlikely that you are going to be able to get funding in that fiscal year. And it's because, specifically New Hampshire, opens up their raise your hand period only one time a year. Some states accept applications year round. New Hampshire is not one of them. So if you have a project that you would like to get funding for and you want to raise your hand, you need to raise your hand by May 31st. So these next two slides, we're going to talk about the types of criteria that New Hampshire will provide points for in terms of ranking. Now, what I like about New Hampshire is that each of these bullets on this page and on the next page, you have an opportunity to get points for. Some states will essentially like lump all of these together and say you get the most points of only one checkbox that you've checked. So essentially, like if it's a storage and a distribution project, you're only going to get points for storage because that they've arbitrarily attributed more points to storage deficiencies than distribution deficiencies. Not so in New Hampshire. Essentially, your project could address any or all of the bullets on this page and on the second page. So I sort of separated them out on two slides just because one, it would get kind of messy if I put them all on one, but two, we tend to think, we in the SRF business tend to think of these types of projects as like the bread and butter of the SRF program. And like, of course, that's a project I'm going to do. And of course, I'm going to get points for that. So when it comes to these other types of points that a borrower can get, these are like bonus points. So back to the slide a little bit earlier on capacity development, that technical, managerial, and financial capacity. If you, the borrower, are working with a technical assistance provider that DES has approved, you can get additional points. If you have an asset management plan and the project is identified in the asset management plan, you can get additional points. If the project, in addition to replacing distribution lines, is gonna replace distribution lines that are leaking water like a sieve, then you could get additional points in this green category for fixing those leaky pipes. If that distribution line is leaking pipes, but also eroding because a river is flooding more frequently than it used to, and the project is going to move that line away from the river while also fixing the leaks, you can get additional points for resiliency, because that river that is flooding more often because you're seeing higher rain events because of climate change, so on and so forth. So you can get additional points for consolidation or interconnection if the project is a single point of failure, or say, for example, you only have one transmission main and you're looking to add an additional transmission main, essentially redundancy. You can get additional points. And then this something I didn't mention a little earlier, but I think I do on successive slides, is this concept of readiness to proceed. So in addition to wanting to fund the projects that are going to address the most critical public health need, the state also needs to make sure that the projects are the money is going to projects that are ready to go, because New Hampshire is being told by EPA that they need to move their money quickly. And so ensuring that the projects are also going to move quickly is really important. So these next couple of sub bullets are what we consider readiness to proceed milestones that are really important in ranking and moving the money. So if you already have the authority to incur debt, like head of the class. Any questions before? So I want to pop over to the preliminary application, but just want to know if there's any questions.
Nope, no new questions.
Not that one. Okay. So here we have basically a printed copy of the pre-application form. It may look different if you are filling this out on the website. So just bear with me. So some of this information is pretty basic. You're going to know your water system name and your ID. You're going to know whether you should know whether you're a public or a private. And in terms of, I actually forgot to talk about eligibility. So any public community water system is eligible to apply, and any nonprofit, non-community water system is eligible to apply. So basic information, we get to this section on median household income. So again, kudos to New Hampshire in basically providing an easy button for you. So it wants you to provide your community's MHI. But so instead of having you trying to navigate the Census Bureau's website, it has already summarized every community's median household income. So when you click on this, this link, it will bring you to a page on New Hampshire's website that lists out your community. And so you'll just put your MHI here. It is also then having you provide what the residential water bill would be if the user used 90,000 gallons a year of water. And the reason is because, and we'll get to this a little bit later in the presentation, but essentially the New Hampshire will look at what's called an affordability index, and it's based on the ratio of MHI to water rate. And so that's why they're asking for this information. Some communities may just charge a flat rate. So if you charge a flat rate, charge a flat rate. And I know that like HOAs or manufactured home communities are probably like, well, water's included into in the rent. I would ask New Hampshire how they want that represented, because I know in Vermont I would want it represented one way. New Hampshire may ask in a different way. So I would defer to them on that answer. And this next question is to make sure that the SRF program's money, especially the subsidized money, is going to communities where the majority of the users are full-time residents. So down a little further, we talk about now's where we get into like the project specifics. So we want to talk about, you want to give a name to it. And here's where you're gonna ask for or indicate whether this is a step 1 or step 2 loan, or is a step 2 and step 3, or if it's a step 3 only. So this would be you only want preliminary and or final design funding. You're going to click this. If you want final design and construction funding, you're going to click this. And if you're like, we've already got all those things, we just need construction, you're going to click this. Now this project description, I want you to go back to the last 2 slides that I showed, and remember that there are many categories that you can get additional points for. And so when you're filling out your project description, be as descriptive as possible, weaving in some of those some of those potential categories for additional points. So don't just be like water line replacement. You're going to want to say, 10,000 feet of water line replacement that has had 6 leaks in the past 2 years, that is exposed due to river erosion, and it is the only line that is going to the hospital, for example. I mean, that will get you a lot more points than just saying it's a water line replacement project. And then these next couple of questions are about lead service lines. So specific to, like we said here, regular water line replacement and non-lead service line work is not eligible for that lead service line funding. So this kind of goes back to the make sure that it's actually leaded, and that you are replacing the entire service line. And then we have emerging contaminant questions, and then your asset management question. Any questions? Or I pop back to.
Nope, no questions.
Okay, I'm gonna need to give it a little gas here. Okay, we talked about readiness to proceed. These are some milestones that that programs expect in terms of sort of check boxes to make sure that the project is advancing. In New Hampshire, one of their readiness to proceed criteria is essentially ensuring that you have the authorization to incur debt prior to June of the following year's fiscal year. So we are talking about drafting the FY24 intended use plan. So if you are on the priority list on the FY24 intended use plan, you will need to have the authorization to incur debt by June of 2025 in order to remain eligible for funding. Environmental review is another significant milestone in terms of project planning. New Hampshire has an environmental report template that you and/or your consulting engineer can fill out and submit to the program, and then the program will work through its process to determine whether it's going to qualify for a categorical exclusion, or if a little bit more work is going to have to be done to basically give you the okay that this is not going to have a negative environmental impact. A credit review is going to happen on every borrower. And as I like to say, a credit review is not just dollars and cents. It takes into consideration socioeconomic issues, tax trends, growth projections, or frankly, shrinkings, growth or reduction. Opposite of growth is shrinking. Yeah, population shrinks, things of that nature. And this would be where, again, back to the step 0 side of things, that you're going to want to make sure that you have a budget. It would be an awesome time to do some projections. It would be a great time to, if you already haven't had an external audit, to think about getting one, because you may need to get one as part of the project, or at the end of the project. So good time to be thinking about all of these, all of the ways that the program, and what I mean by that, the New Hampshire DES will evaluate your credit worthiness. So in terms of loan rate in terms for New Hampshire, the base loan is going to be, so actually New Hampshire lets you choose 5, 10, 15, or 20-year terms, or you can go up to 30 years if you're a disadvantaged community. And we will get into kind of what a disadvantaged community is on the next slide. And then every loan will have an interest rate. Well, almost typically every loan will have an interest rate, and the interest rate is set every year based on the bond buyer's 11-month bond index, I believe that is the 11-month bond index, and it is published on DES's website right now. So it was published in August of 23, and that is still the current interest rates. There is an administrative fee that is part of the interest rate, and the administrative fee is 2%. If the interest rate is less than 2%, then it essentially is all admin fees. So it's not like you get an admin fee on top of the interest rate. And the loan term cannot exceed, and this seems like, of course it can't, but the loan term cannot exceed the expected useful life of the assets funded. Many states will have like a fund calculator, a fund calculator that your engineer can use to essentially prove that the assets funded don't exceed the expected useful life of the term you're asking for. So in terms of what a disadvantaged community is, federally speaking, a disadvantaged community is whatever the state says it is. So New Hampshire says that a disadvantaged community is one that has an affordability index of greater than or equal to 0.8, and this goes back to that ratio of user rate to median household income. And further, which this is really nice, I don't often see this. I usually see states only consider communities financially or disadvantaged based on finances. But New Hampshire has said, okay, you are environmentally disadvantaged if you are exposed to contaminated water that includes lead, PFAS, arsenic, uranium, or manganese. And so we're going to flip back to the application quickly. Are there any questions while I'm flipping?
No.
Okay, either I am doing a really good job or people are not paying attention. Okay, so here's the part of back to that preliminary application where you are going to ask for the term that you want. Now, most people are probably going to be like, well, I want to have the longest term possible, so I'm going to sign up for 30 years. Remember, you can only get 30 years if you are considered a disadvantaged community. So even if you check 30 years, the program will probably, well, not probably, the community or the program will do the calculation, and they may have to adjust down depending on the calculation. This is also where you're going to ask for how much money you want. And some people are probably thinking, well, it's the whole project. That's what I want it for. You'd be surprised the number of people who would apply for a loan in Vermont who wouldn't actually tell me how much they needed. So make sure that your loan request is filled in. And it's important to indicate like what portion of the project can it be attributed to lead and or PFAS, because there may be, or there are benefits associated with addressing those types of contaminants. And it'll ask you what the project costs are based on. This is almost always going to be preliminary engineering or engineer's estimate or project cost summary or something like that. And there is an opportunity to indicate here. So for example, if your project cost is $1 million, but your loan request is $500,000, the program is going to want to know where the other $500,000 is coming from, because they're going to want to know that the project is, quote, whole before they actually fund it. And so this is where you're going to list where the other sources of funding have come from or you intend for them to come from, including cash on hand. And here's where we're looking at the readiness to proceed criteria. So again, it's really important that the project is not 10 years down the road, that it is in the near term, and that you are moving towards meeting those milestones to get the project completed. So these boxes are where you'd put those numbers, where you'd indicate that. And then finally, there's sort of the there's the miscellaneous bucket. There's the bucket for you to communicate to the program if there's something unique about your project. For example, instead of using the median household income that's listed on the website through the American Community Survey, you actually got an income survey because you're like, I don't trust those numbers. We are lower than that. This is where you're going to say, actually, we have an income survey. Here's our MHI, and you're going to attach the income survey to this preliminary application. So that's the preliminary application. It's pretty it's pretty short. I like to think it's pretty straightforward. It's not asking you for more than you need to give them, but enough for them to rank your project and make sure that it meets the funding deadlines of the program. Okay, I have a couple slides left. I'm going to breeze right through them. So this is what people always want to, they're like, how much free money can I get? And so this is where, these are some ways that New Hampshire, or these are the ways that New Hampshire provides principal forgiveness to communities. So in the top left, you have the minimum principal forgiveness available to municipal disadvantaged communities based on the affordability index. On the top left, you have those environmentally disadvantaged communities and the amount of principal forgiveness that they're eligible for. And then on the bottom right, or the bottom left, oh shoot, I probably said that wrong. You have nonprofit disadvantaged communities or county-owned public community water systems, and essentially their range, their MHI range, and whether they can get principal forgiveness. I would be remiss if I didn't talk about the fact that the SRFs are a disbursement-based loan program, meaning you have to pay your bill before you can ask for reimbursement from the program. Why this is important, especially for the really small communities, is that you may not have the requisite cash on hand in order to pay your engineer, for example, for a month's worth of work on final design. That could be tens of thousands of dollars. So you may need to seek out short-term financing from your local bank. I'm just making this as a blanket statement. I don't know exactly how New Hampshire works. I know in Vermont we would do this. We would say, go to your local bank, get a short-term financing note. It's essentially a line of credit. The water system would pay would borrow money from the short-term line of credit to pay the engineer. They would then submit the invoice to the funding program. The funding program would then reimburse the water system for the amount of money that they paid the engineer, and then the water system would pay back the short-term financing. You don't need financing for the entire project cost. You really only need financing for what might be the most expensive 2 months or so, to just give yourself some flexibility. And that is the end of my part. Questions before I turn it back over to Laura?
Yes, we do have a couple questions. Are you saying that you can get points if you're a disadvantaged community with regards to water issues such as arsenic, PFAS, manganese, etc.?
Let's go back to the points. Let's see. And I would defer to New Hampshire on this. Let's see here. So we do, so you can get points if you are a disadvantaged community for affordability, that's that ratio. And you can get points for addressing environmental issues like PFAS or lead or things of that nature. Now those combined, so you wouldn't get points, for example, if you were if you were environmentally disadvantaged. New Hampshire, can you answer this clearer?
Yes, Cindy, you said.
This is Cindy. Can you hear me all right?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. Yeah.
Yep.
So we do have points for water quality under the intended use plan. So if you have arsenic or a violation for radionuclides or manganese, et cetera, boil orders, all those water quality points are under the first section of the IUP, section A. So you would get points if you have elevated levels above the standards.
Great, thank you, Cindy.
And this is Kim Keller. I just want to jump in to say that you'll get those points if the project is addressing those contaminants.
Right.
Thank you.
Okay.
Great, thank you all. Next question, could we do our own income survey or would it have to be professionally completed?
So, and you're actually, you're preempting us a little bit because in this next section, we were going to mention that RCAP Solutions is available to assist with income surveys. Now, whether, and again, I would defer to New Hampshire. So in Vermont, no, you couldn't do your own. You would need essentially a third party to act as the kind of like intermediary. I believe New Hampshire also wants a third party, correct?
Should I answer that?
Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, so we do use RCAP as well as a third party to collect the responses. The community can help distributing the survey and then with an envelope and a stamp so that they send them back to RCAP, who tallies the results, and that way the community, it's confidential response. So we do use RCAP as well for that.
Yeah, so that would be the reason why the community shouldn't do their own is like Cindy said, is confidentiality.
But they can help distribute and send
Yes.
reminders. All that legwork is important for the small system folks to help, because RCAP cannot, do all the work. That they will tally the results, but really the community needs to distribute the survey, encourage folks to send the response, emphasize that it's confidential, all of that, so that we get an adequate response. And we usually shoot for 75% response rate.
Great, thank you both. One more question. Since COVID, I'm seeing many underestimations because of the cost of material and engineering costs that are increasing more than normal. How do you advise on dealing with estimation cost given that situation?
Well, put in a generous contingency. I don't know. I would defer to New Hampshire on how they handle project cost estimates and overruns.
Does anyone from DES want to attempt to address that?
So we've had several projects have with cost overruns, unfortunately. So we're experiencing that currently. But yes, so upfront, you want to provide a generous contingency because it's all about the timing and the supply, so many of those factors. So the consultants are taking those into consideration when they're putting together the the estimate for the funding request. And then if that's not enough, we have had to go back to request additional funding. So that would be an amendment to the loan. Once it's in place, they would have to say, we would, and that can be done in the course of the project. So say, usually the small system projects will have multiple contracts. So maybe we do the pump house up, first, or the well first, and then the pump station. But we know we don't have enough money for the distribution piping. So midway through the project, or as soon as we realize that we don't have enough money, then they could make a request to amend the loan to request additional funding. Another option is that they have come to other funding sources. So they've gone to CDBG for additional funding, and to the trust fund also to supplement the SRF loan.
Great, thank you. And that's it for questions right now.
All right, Laura.
Thank you, Ashley. That was incredibly fascinating, and I learned a lot. So, and I appreciate all of that work. But I just wanted to circle back, because if you're feeling like you've listened to everything Ashley said and you're feeling a little bit overwhelmed about everything, that is where we, the New England Water Infrastructure Network, can help. Next slide, please. So we work, so basically we are a network in partnership with the New England Environmental Finance Center that works with a range of stakeholders to amplify the work of the state SRF programs. So you'll see, so we have our core partners, Quantified Ventures. So Ashley is one of our core partners. RCAP Solutions, that Ashley just mentioned, is another one of our partners. Basically, we have a team that can provide a whole range of assistance. Ashley, SRF guru, and financing expert, and RCAP, they do, can help you do an income survey, rate analyses, stormwater, community engagement, kind of whatever challenges you might be facing. We sort of work very closely, as I mentioned, with sort of EPA, or work is funded by EPA, and we collaborate with the state agencies. So our work is really meant to kind of amplify sort of their great work. So we work very closely with the New Hampshire DES folks, and the types of systems we work with are anyone that's SRF eligible. So municipalities, water utilities, manufactured home communities, tribes, and then the right column are sort of folks that we bring in as needed. So if we need some additional support, we'll pull in, another engineering partner, consultant, and a community-based organization. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, we provide free technical assistance to systems facing wastewater, drinking water, stormwater challenges. We are just closing out our first year, and we currently have 17 active projects. You'll see in the map here. These are in various stages. Most of them are in the earlier phases, and the scope ranges from sort of like a small discrete project, like working with a community on an income survey, to working with a larger city to do a comprehensive assessment of their stormwater and sewer system. So definitely a range of projects. I know that we're talking to you folks here, probably likely it's very small systems, and that's great. We love working with small systems, and we're here to help. If you've heard this talk today and you're interested in submitting a pre-app or an application, or having any other issues, please do not hesitate to reach out. We help with pre-applications and applications as well. And I will just close out our next slide. Ashley, thank you. Yes, please, you can reach out to me, you can reach out to Ashley. You can, find more information about us on our website, and we have a sort of the assistance request form there. And we, we're here to help if we can, and support the great work of New Hampshire DES. And I think that's all I have. Thank you.
Yes. And thanks for the opportunity to talk SRF today.
Are there any more questions? Or?
We do not have any questions at the moment. Just a reminder, if you do have a question, you can type it into the chat box or raise your hand and we can unmute you. But in the meantime, thank you, Laura and Ashley, for a great presentation. And thank you to everyone for taking the time to attend this session and any others that you may have attended throughout the week. We hope it's been helpful for you and provided you with some ideas and some resources to move forward with. Let me check for questions once more. Let's see, I'm still not seeing any questions, so I'll take a moment. I'm going to switch and share my screen here. And I just wanted to mention one other upcoming training opportunity. Can you all see my screen? Okay. So the Source Water Protection Conference is coming up and will be held May 16th in person in Pembroke, New Hampshire. More details are available on the DES website. It's always a great conference and we encourage you to consider attending. And let me take one more look. And I'm not seeing any other questions. So with that, I think we can conclude the workshop. Thank you all again and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank
you.